The security footage didn't lie. Marco Valentini had watched the same 60-second clip 17 times in the past month, and each viewing revealed something new. A detail he'd missed. A gesture that spoke volumes. The way her shoulders dropped the moment she thought she was alone. It was 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late September, and Marco sat in the darkness of his private office on the 42nd floor of the Valentini Tower in Chicago. The city sprawled below him, a carpet of lights that represented power, territory, and the carefully constructed empire his family had built over 3 generations. But his eyes weren't on the skyline, they were on the screen. On the woman who cleaned his office every morning before dawn. She appeared on camera at exactly 4:52 a.m., the same time she arrived every weekday. Marco had pulled up the historical footage going back 6 months, the entire duration of her employment with the corporate cleaning service his building used. 6 months of watching her move through his space like a ghost, touching his things, organizing his world, completely unaware that he knew she existed. Her name was Elena Russo, 28 years old. No criminal record. No social media presence beyond a dormant Facebook account from college that she hadn't updated in 4 years. The background check his head of security had run was frustratingly sparse. She was a phantom, existing only in the margins of the city's consciousness. Marco leaned forward, his elbows on the obsidian desk, his dark eyes tracking her movements on the screen. She wore the standard uniform of the cleaning company, navy blue polo shirt, black pants, her dark hair pulled back in a braid that fell to the middle of her back. She pushed a cleaning cart that squeaked softly, the sound picked up by the audio feed. But it was what she did after the routine cleaning that had first caught his attention 3 months ago. She finished vacuuming. She emptied his trash. She wiped down the mahogany conference table and the leather chairs. Standard protocol. But then she stopped at his desk. Marco watched as she carefully, reverently, straightened the papers he'd left scattered across the surface. She didn't just push them into a pile. She organized them. Her fingers moved with purpose, sorting documents by size, by type, creating order from chaos. She aligned his pens. She adjusted the angle of his desk lamp so it pointed at the exact center of the workspace. She moved his coffee mug precisely 2 inches to the right, placing it on the coaster he always forgot to use. It was the gesture of someone who understood systems, someone who saw patterns. Then she did something that made Marco's breath catch even now, watching it for the 18th time. She picked up the small silver picture frame that sat at the corner of his desk. It held a photo of Marco's mother, Lucia Valentini, taken the summer before she died. His mother stood in the garden of their Lake Forest estate, laughing at something off camera, her hands covered in soil from planting roses. Elena held the frame carefully, studying the photo. Her expression softened. She smiled, a small private smile that transformed her tired face into something luminous. She ran her thumb gently across the glass, removing a smudge he hadn't noticed. Then she set it back down, angling it slightly so that someone sitting at the desk would have a better view. She saw his mother. She cared enough to clean the glass properly, to position it with thought. That was the moment Marco Valentini realized he'd been watching the wrong people. For 5 years, since taking over the family business at 29 after his father's sudden death, Marco had been surrounded by operators, lawyers who could argue black into white, accountants who could make millions disappear into legitimate enterprises, soldiers who would pull a trigger without asking questions. Everyone wanted something from him. Loyalty was purchased. Trust was a transaction. But this woman, who didn't even know he knew her name, had shown his mother's photograph more genuine care than most people in his life showed him. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Marco closed the laptop. He'd seen enough for tonight. Or rather, he'd seen enough to confirm what he'd been suspecting for weeks. He wanted to meet her. Not as the boss of the building who happened to notice a cleaning woman. Not as Marco Valentini, the name that made lawyers nervous and politicians return calls. He wanted to meet Elena Russo as a man meeting a woman who'd somehow become the most interesting part of his day without ever speaking a word to him. The question was how. He couldn't just appear in his office at 5 in the morning. That would terrify her. He couldn't have his security team bring her to him. That would be an abuse of power that made his stomach turn. He couldn't engineer some chance encounter in the building. She worked the graveyard shift precisely to avoid encountering the people whose spaces she cleaned. Marco stood and walked to the window. His reflection stared back at him. Dark hair starting to show threads of silver at 34. The hard lines of his face that his mother used to say made him look older than his years. The scar above his left eyebrow from a territorial dispute when he was 22, and still learning that mercy was often more powerful than violence. He looked like what he was, a man born into a world where power was everything and vulnerability was death. But watching Elena Russo carefully angle his mother's photograph toward the light had cracked something open in his chest. Something he'd thought died with Lucia Valentini in a car accident that was ruled mechanical failure, but that Marco knew in his bones was murder disguised as misfortune. His phone buzzed. A text from his consigliere, Vincent Calabresi. Meeting with the Zanetti family moved to Thursday. They want neutral ground, suggested the restaurant. Marco typed back quickly. Agreed. Send details. The Zanettis were a problem. They'd been encroaching on Valentini shipping routes through the port of Chicago, skimming product, causing delays. It was the kind of disrespect that required response, but it was also the kind of situation that could escalate into violence if handled poorly. Marco preferred not to handle things poorly. Another text came through, this one from his sister, Gabriella. Mama's birthday next week. I'm planning the memorial mass. You need to be there. No excuses. Marco felt the familiar tightness in his chest. 5 years since the accident. 5 years of carrying the guilt that maybe if he'd been more careful, more aware of his enemies, his mother wouldn't have been a target. 5 years of an empty house that used to smell like her perfume, and the rosemary she grew in clay pots on the windowsill. I'll be there, he typed back. He pocketed the phone and made a decision. Tomorrow morning he would be in his office when Elena Russo arrived. Not to confront her, not to frighten her, just to be there, to occupy the same space. To see if the woman who moved through his world like a careful ghost was as interesting in person as she was on grainy security footage. Elena Russo's alarm went off at 3:30 a.m., the same time it had every weekday for the past 6 months. She silenced it before the second beep, her hand moving automatically in the darkness of the studio apartment she could barely afford. She didn't turn on the light. She'd learned to dress in the dark months ago, when she realized that the fluorescent bulb in her bathroom had started flickering, and she couldn't afford to replace it yet. Not when her brother's next round of physical therapy was due. Not when the medical bills from the accident continued to arrive, with their polite, impersonal demands for payment. Elena pulled on the navy polo and black pants that marked her as invisible. She braided her hair by feel, her fingers moving through the familiar pattern while her mind ran through the day's logistics. Valentini Tower first, the premium account that paid the best. Then the law offices on Michigan Avenue. Then the dental clinic in River North. 7 buildings, 42 floors total, 8 hours of cleaning other people's spaces while they slept in their comfortable homes and dreamed their comfortable dreams. She grabbed the protein bar that would serve as breakfast and the thermos of coffee she'd made the night before. She locked the door of her apartment, checking it twice because the lock was loose and sometimes didn't catch. She descended 4 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken for a month and the landlord kept promising to fix it next week. The pre-dawn streets of Chicago were her kingdom. At 4 a.m., the city belonged to people like her, the night shift workers, the insomniacs, the ones who lived in the margins. She walked 6 blocks to the Red Line station, her hand wrapped around the pepper spray in her pocket that she'd never had to use but carried anyway. The train rattled through the darkness. Elena sat in the mostly empty car and allowed herself to close her eyes for the 20-minute ride downtown. She didn't sleep. She just existed in the space between waking and exhaustion, the place where she spent most of her life now. She thought about her brother, Alessandro. 25 years old and relearning how to walk after a drunk driver had T-boned his car 8 months ago. Shattered pelvis, broken spine. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Elena looked at the medical bills, currently totaling $340,000 and climbing, and wondered what their definition of lucky was. Their parents were dead. Heart attack for their father 10 years ago. Cancer for their mother 3 years after that. It was just Elena and Alessandro, and he needed her. So she worked the graveyard shift for the premium pay rate. She worked 40 hours a week for the cleaning company and picked up weekend shifts doing retail inventory. She slept 4 hours a night and told herself it was temporary. Everything was temporary if you could just hold on long enough. The train arrived at the Washington State Station. Elena climbed the stairs to street level, emerging into the canyon of skyscrapers that housed Chicago's financial district. The Valentini Tower rose 42 stories, all glass and steel, and the kind of aggressive modern architecture that was designed to intimidate. Elena walked through the service entrance, badging in with the security guard who never looked up from his phone. She took the freight elevator to the executive floors, her cart squeaking softly in the sterile silence. The executive suite started at the 38th floor. Elena worked her way up, cleaning the conference rooms and the private offices of people whose names she recognized from news articles about corporate acquisitions and political fundraisers. She moved efficiently, mechanically, her mind empty of everything except the next task. By 4:45 a.m., she reached the 42nd floor, the personal office of Marco Valentini. Elena had never met him. She'd seen his photograph in the Chicago Tribune when he'd donated $1 million to a children's hospital last year. She knew he was young for someone who ran a corporation the size of Valentini Enterprises, which had interests in shipping, real estate, restaurants, and construction. She also knew, because she wasn't naive, that some of those interests were probably not entirely legal. The Valentini name carried weight in Chicago that went beyond business acumen. But that wasn't her concern. Her concern was cleaning his office well enough that the cleaning company kept assigning her the premium accounts. She unlocked the door with her master key and stepped inside. The office was exactly as she'd left it yesterday. Massive, intimidating. Windows that overlooked the city like a declaration of ownership. The desk was mahogany and clearly antique, heavy and solid in a room full of modern glass and chrome. There were papers scattered across it, a coffee mug with dried residue, pens that had rolled toward the edge. Elena started with the windows. She sprayed and wiped, erasing the fingerprints and the city smog. She moved to the bookshelves, dusting the leather-bound volumes that looked more decorative than read. She vacuumed the Persian rug that probably cost more than 6 months of her salary. Then she approached the desk. This was her favorite part, though she would never admit it to anyone. There was something soothing about creating order from chaos, about taking the scattered debris of someone's workday and organizing it into something functional. She sorted the papers carefully, never reading them but organizing them by type. Contracts in one pile, spreadsheets in another, handwritten notes in a third. She aligned them with the edge of the desk. She gathered the pens and placed them in the marble holder. She wiped down the coffee mug and set it on the coaster. Then she picked up the silver picture frame. The woman in the photograph looked happy. Genuinely, unself-consciously happy. She was beautiful in the way that Italian women often were, strong features, dark eyes, an elegance that wasn't about makeup or styling, but about bone structure and confidence. She was kneeling in a garden, her hands dirty, her smile bright. Elena felt the familiar pang of grief. Her own mother had loved gardening, had spent every spare moment coaxing tomatoes and basil and roses from the small plot behind their old house in Bridgeport. Elena could still smell the tomatoes, warm from the sun, that her mother would slice and serve with olive oil and salt. She cleaned the glass carefully, removing the smudge from someone's fingerprint. She angled the frame slightly, positioning it so that someone sitting at the desk would see it better. A small gesture, probably unnecessary, but it felt important to honor this woman's smile, to make sure she was seen properly. Elena set the frame down and stepped back. The office looked perfect, clean, organized, ready for whatever powerful decisions got made here during daylight hours. She checked her watch. 5:03 a.m. Right on schedule. She pushed her cart toward the door, reaching for the handle. The lights came on. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the pepper spray in her pocket. A man stood near the windows, his hand still on the light switch. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair and darker eyes that were currently fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her rent, charcoal gray with a crisp white shirt open at the collar. No tie, like he'd dressed in a hurry or hadn't gone home yet. "I'm sorry," Elena stammered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know anyone was here. I'll come back." "Don't," the man said. His voice was deep, quiet, carrying an authority that made her freeze. "You're not in trouble. I just wanted to meet you." Elena stared at him. Her brain struggled to process the words. Wanted to meet you. Why would anyone want to meet the cleaning woman? Unless she'd done something wrong. Unless she'd broken something valuable. Unless this was the moment she lost the job she desperately needed. "Meet me?" she managed. The man took a step forward. Elena took an automatic step back, her spine hitting the door. He stopped immediately, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I promise. My name is Marco. Marco Valentini." Oh God, the owner. The actual owner of the building, of the company, of probably half the city block they were standing in. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "Mr. Valentini, I swear I haven't taken anything. I would never—" "Elena," he interrupted. "That's your name, right? Elena Russo?" She nodded mutely. Her hand was still in her pocket, wrapped around the pepper spray, as if that would help her against a man who could destroy her life with a single phone call. "I've been watching you," Marco said. The words should have been terrifying, should have sent her running, but something in the way he said them, quiet and almost apologetic, made her pause. "Watching me?" she whispered. "The security cameras," Marco clarified. He gestured toward the small black dome in the corner of the ceiling. "I review the footage sometimes. I started noticing you a few months ago. The way you organized my desk. The way you were so careful with everything." Elena didn't know what to say. Her mind was spinning, trying to understand if this was a threat or something else entirely. Marco ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed frustrated, uncertain. Nothing like the powerful businessman she'd imagined. "I'm making this worse," he muttered. "I wanted to meet you because I wanted to thank you. For the way you treat my mother's photograph. For the care you show in my space. For being someone who clearly sees things that other people miss." Elena's grip on the pepper spray loosened slightly. She looked at the desk, at the silver frame now positioned to catch the morning light. "Your mother?" she asked quietly. "She died 5 years ago," Marco said. His voice was carefully controlled, but Elena heard the grief underneath it. "Car accident. You're the only person who's touched that frame who seemed to actually see her." Something in Elena's chest loosened, because she understood grief. She understood the weight of losing the person who taught you how to be human. She looked happy, Elena said, in the photo, like she loved what she was doing. She did. Marco's expression softened. She was always happiest in the garden, said it was the only place that made sense. They stood there in the fluorescent light of the office, the city beginning to wake up beyond the windows. Two strangers who suddenly weren't quite strangers anymore, connected by grief and the careful positioning of a photograph. I should go, Elena said finally. I have 6 more buildings to clean. 6 more? Marco's eyes narrowed. You work multiple buildings in one shift? Elena nodded. 7 total. The company assigns routes based on square footage and client needs. That's why you're here so early. You're the first stop. The premium account, Elena confirmed. This building pays the highest rate. Marco was quiet for a moment, studying her with those dark, assessing eyes. Elena felt exposed under that gaze, like he was seeing things she tried very hard to keep hidden. The exhaustion, the desperation, the bone-deep fear that she would fail, that she wouldn't be enough, that her brother would suffer because she couldn't work fast enough, or hard enough, or long enough. Elena, Marco said slowly, why does someone with your attention to detail, your obvious intelligence, work the graveyard shift for a cleaning company? It was the question she'd been dreading, the question that would reveal too much. But something about the way he asked it, genuinely curious, without judgment, made her answer honestly. Medical bills, she said simply. My brother was in a car accident 8 months ago. He's alive, but the bills are... She stopped, unable to quantify the enormousness of the debt. I work every hour I can. Marco's expression shifted. Something hardened in his eyes, but it wasn't directed at her. It was the look of a man who'd just identified a problem that required solving. How much? He asked. I'm sorry? How much do you owe? Elena's laugh was bitter. That's not your concern, Mr. Valentini. Marco, he corrected. And humor me. How much? $340,000, Elena said. Give or take whatever new bill arrives tomorrow. The number hung in the air between them. A number that represented her brother's shattered spine and broken pelvis and months of physical therapy. A number that kept her awake at night doing calculations that never quite added up. A number that meant she would be cleaning offices at dawn for the rest of her life, and it still wouldn't be enough. Marco pulled out his phone. He typed something quickly, his thumbs moving with the ease of someone who commanded the world from a touch screen. What are you doing? Elena asked nervously. Solving a problem. Marco looked up at her. Give me your brother's name and the hospital. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Mr. Valentini, Marco, I appreciate whatever you think you're doing, but I don't accept charity. I work for what I have. This isn't charity, Marco said. This is an investment. In what? In someone who sees things other people miss. Marco slipped his phone back into his pocket. Elena, I run a corporation with holdings across 6 states. I have accountants and lawyers and consultants who cost me more per hour than you probably make in a month. And not one of them has shown the kind of attention to detail that you display cleaning my office. Elena stared at him, trying to understand where this was going. I'm offering you a job, Marco said. Not cleaning. Something that actually uses your brain. My operations manager just retired, and I need someone who can see patterns, who can organize chaos, who understands systems. I clean offices, Elena said weakly. I don't know anything about running a corporation. You organized my desk better than my assistant does. You saw that my mother's frame needed to be angled differently. You care about details that other people ignore. Marco took a step closer, and this time Elena didn't back away. That's not something I can teach. That's instinct. That's talent. Why? Elena whispered. Why would you offer this to me? Marco was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. Because I've been watching you for 3 months, Elena. I've seen the way you move through the world like you're trying not to take up space, like you're apologizing for existing. And I recognize that. I used to be the same way before I learned that people like us, people who see things clearly, we're not supposed to be invisible. We're supposed to be the ones running things. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. I need to think about it, she managed. That's fair. Marco pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. He held it out to her. This is my private number. Not the office line. Me directly. Think about it. Call me when you decide. Elena took the card with trembling fingers. It was heavy cardstock, embossed with his name and a phone number. Nothing else. Just the essential information. Like the way she organized his desk. I need to finish my route, Elena said. She was still clutching the card, unable to look away from the simple black text. Of course. Marco stepped back, giving her space to move to the door. Thank you for taking care of my mother's photograph. It means more than you know. Elena nodded. She pushed her cart out of the office, her mind reeling, the card burning against her palm. As the door closed behind her, she heard Marco's voice one more time, so quiet she almost missed it. I'll be seeing you, Elena Russo. And somehow, Elena knew he meant it. Elena didn't call the number on the card. For 3 days, she carried it in her pocket while she cleaned offices, rode the red line through pre-dawn darkness, and sat beside Alessandro's hospital bed during his physical therapy sessions. The card grew soft at the edges from her nervous fingers tracing the embossed letters. Marco Valentini. A name that meant power. A name that could change everything. She didn't call because she didn't trust it. Didn't trust him. Didn't trust that a man who lived in the sky would genuinely see something valuable in a woman who scrubbed his floors. But on the 4th morning, when she arrived at the Valentini Tower at 4:52 a.m. exactly, something was different. There was a black sedan parked at the service entrance. Not unusual. Executives sometimes worked odd hours, but as Elena approached with her badge raised, the rear door opened. Marco Valentini stepped out. He wore jeans. Dark, expensive denim that probably cost more than her weekly salary, paired with a black sweater that made him look less like a corporate magnate and more like a man who could blend into shadows. His hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. You didn't call, he said without preamble. Elena stopped walking. Her hand tightened on the handle of her cleaning cart. I've been thinking. For 4 days. It's a big decision. It's a job offer, Elena, not a marriage proposal. Marco's mouth quirked slightly. Though I'm starting to think you'd find that less terrifying. Despite herself, Elena felt a smile tug at her lips. You ambushed me at 4 in the morning to complain that I'm taking too long to consider your offer? I'm here because I don't like waiting when I've made up my mind about something. Marco moved closer, his hands in his pockets, unthreatening but purposeful. And I've made up my mind about you. You don't know me. I know you work yourself to exhaustion for someone you love. I know you see patterns other people miss. I know you treat a stranger's mother's photograph with more care than most people show living relatives. His dark eyes held hers. That's enough for me to know you're exactly what I need. Elena wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe that someone saw value in her beyond her ability to clean and organize and disappear. But she'd learned the hard way that offers that seemed too good were usually hiding complications. What would I actually be doing? She asked. You said operations manager, but what does that mean? Marco gestured toward the building. Come upstairs, let me show you. I have 6 more buildings. I called your supervisor. Marco pulled out his phone, showing her an email. Told them the Valentini account is expanding and we're requesting you full-time for a special project. They've reassigned your other buildings. You're on paid leave as of this morning while we discuss terms. Elena felt a spike of panic. You can't just, I need those hours. You'll be paid for them. Full rate, plus overtime you would have earned. Marco's voice was firm. Elena, I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to show you that there's a different way to live. One where you're not running yourself into the ground. She should have been angry. Should have been insulted that he'd made decisions about her life without asking. But all she felt was a bone-deep exhaustion and the terrible, fragile hope that maybe he was right. Okay, she whispered. Show me. The executive suite looked different at 5 in the morning with the lights on, and Marco Valentini explaining what he actually wanted from her. They stood in a conference room adjacent to his office. The walls were glass, overlooking the city that was just beginning to wake. On the massive table were spread dozens of documents, spreadsheets, shipping manifests, and what looked like architectural blueprints. This is the legitimate side of Valentini Enterprises, Marco said, gesturing to the organized chaos. Shipping contracts through the Port of Chicago, real estate development in 3 states, restaurant franchise operations, construction projects. We gross about $200 million annually in legal revenue. Elena's eyes widened. She'd known the company was large, but seeing the scope laid out made her realize just how vast Marco's world actually was. My operations manager, Victor Castellano, handled all of this for 20 years, Marco continued. He retired 3 months ago, and since then, things have been slipping. Small things, shipping delays, inventory discrepancies. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to make me wonder if someone's taking advantage of the transition period. You think someone's stealing from you, Elena said. Marco looked at her sharply. That was fast. It's the obvious conclusion. New manager retires, problems emerge, you suspect internal theft. Elena moved closer to the table, her eyes scanning the documents. Have you run a financial audit? 2 of them. Both came back clean. Then it's not the money directly. Elena picked up a shipping manifest, studying the columns of data. It's probably the product. Something that wouldn't show up in accounting because the inventory numbers are being manipulated before they reach the accountants. Marco was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise? Admiration? Something that made heat creep up her neck. You see it, he said quietly. You actually see it. I organize things for a living, Elena said, setting down the manifest. Patterns are just another kind of organization. If these numbers look wrong to you, they probably are. You just need to figure out where the manipulation is happening in the chain. That's exactly what I need help with. Marco pulled out a chair for her. Sit. Please. Let me explain what I'm actually offering. Elena sat, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. Marco remained standing, pacing slightly as he talked. I need someone who can look at these operations with fresh eyes. Someone who isn't part of the existing power structure, who doesn't have loyalty to anyone except the truth. Someone who can spot the irregularities that my accountants miss because they're looking at numbers, not systems. You want me to find your thief. I want you to help me understand my own company better. Marco stopped pacing, leaning against the table to face her directly. The theft, if there is theft, is secondary. What I really need is someone who can see the architecture of the operation and tell me where the weak points are. Elena studied him. He was serious. This wasn't some elaborate charity scheme or a way to make himself feel good about helping the poor cleaning woman. He genuinely believed she could do this. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. What's the salary? She asked, because she needed to understand the practical reality. $80,000 to start, Marco said, with performance bonuses quarterly, health insurance, full coverage, including dental and vision. And the first thing I do is pay off your brother's medical debt completely. Elena's breath caught. That's not... Marco, that's over $300,000. Consider it a signing bonus. His voice was gentle but immovable. Elena, I watched you nearly collapse against your cleaning cart last Tuesday. You're working yourself to death for bills that will take you 15 years to pay off. I can make them disappear with a single wire transfer. Why wouldn't I? Because I don't want to owe you. You won't owe me. You'll be working for me. There's a difference. Marco pulled out the chair beside her and sat, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive and understated cedar and bergamot. I need what you can do. You need financial stability. This is a transaction that benefits both of us. Elena's mind was racing. $80,000. More money than she'd ever imagined making. No more medical debt hanging over her head like a sword. No more choosing between her brother's prescriptions and her own groceries. No more cleaning offices until her back ached and her hands cracked from chemical cleaners. But it meant stepping into Marco Valentini's world, really stepping into it, not just moving through it invisibly. It meant being seen. I need to see my brother, Elena said suddenly. Before I decide, I need to talk to Alessandro. Marco nodded immediately. Of course. I'll drive you. To the hospital? Now? Unless you have somewhere else to be at 5:30 in the morning. Marco stood, offering his hand to help her up. Come on. Let's go ask your brother what he thinks of his sister becoming an operations manager. Elena took his hand. His grip was warm, strong, and when he pulled her to her feet, she felt the coiled strength in him. This was a man who could be gentle, but who'd probably also been violent when necessary. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel oddly safe. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The drive to Northwestern Memorial Hospital took 20 minutes in early morning traffic. Marco's car was exactly what Elena expected. Black, expensive, with leather seats that felt like sitting on clouds. But he drove it himself, no chauffeur. His hands relaxed on the wheel as he navigated the streets with the ease of someone who knew Chicago intimately. Tell me about Alessandro, Marco said as they crossed the Chicago River. Elena looked out the window, watching the city slide past. He's 25, graduated from UIC with a degree in computer engineering 3 years ago. He was working for a tech startup in the Loop when the accident happened. What kind of accident? Drunk driver ran a red light, T-boned Alessandro's car on the driver's side. Elena's voice was flat, reciting facts to keep the emotion manageable. Shattered pelvis, fractured spine. The doctors said he'd never walk again. But he is walking, Marco said. It wasn't a question. Learning to. The physical therapy is working, but it's slow, painful. He gets frustrated. Elena smiled slightly. He was always the smart one, you know? The one who was going to make something of himself. And now he can't even make it to the bathroom without a walker. Marco was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower. My mother was in a car accident too. The one that killed her. Elena turned to look at him. His profile was hard in the early morning light, jaw tight. They said it was mechanical failure, Marco continued. Brake line malfunction. But my mother was obsessive about car maintenance. She would never drive a vehicle that wasn't perfectly maintained. You think someone tampered with it? I know someone did. I just could never prove it. Marco's hands tightened on the wheel briefly, then relaxed. That's what happens in my world, Elena. When you have power, people want to take it from you. And they'll hurt the people you love to do it. It was a warning. Elena recognized it as such. If she took this job, if she stepped into his orbit, she'd be stepping into that danger too. Did you ever find out who did it? She asked quietly. No, but I found the 3 most likely suspects and made sure they understood that coming after my family again would end them. Marco glanced at her. Does that frighten you? Elena thought about it. She should say yes. Should be terrified of a man who casually discussed threatening people's lives, but all she felt was a grim satisfaction that someone had defended his mother's memory, even if it was too late to save her. No, Elena said honestly, it doesn't frighten me. Something shifted in Marco's expression. Approval? Relief? He didn't comment, just returned his attention to the road as they pulled into the hospital parking garage. Alessandro's room was on the 4th floor, in the rehabilitation wing. Elena led Marco through the familiar corridors, nodding at nurses who recognized her from her daily visits. She pushed open the door to room 447. Her brother was awake, sitting in the chair by the window with his walker beside him. He'd been trying to stand on his own. Elena could see the strain in his face, the determination that had kept him fighting through 8 months of hell. Elena? Alessandro looked up, surprised. What are you doing here so early, and who? He stopped, his eyes going to Marco. Sandro, this is Marco Valentini, Elena said. He's offered me a job. Alessandro's gaze sharpened. He might be recovering from catastrophic injuries, but his mind was as quick as ever. Valentini, as in Valentini Enterprises? That's right, Marco said, moving forward to offer his hand. It's good to meet you, Alessandro. Alessandro shook his hand, his grip still strong despite the trauma his body had endured. My sister cleans your office. Why are you offering her a job? Elena winced at the bluntness, but Marco just smiled. Because she's wasted cleaning offices. She should be running them. Running them how? Operations manager, oversight of logistics, shipping, real estate development, 80,000 a year, full benefits, and I pay off your medical debt as a signing bonus. Alessandro's eyes widened. He looked at Elena. This is real? He says it is, Elena said. She moved to sit on the edge of her brother's bed. But Sandro, it's complicated. The Valentini family, they're not just businessmen. There are other things that might be dangerous. I know who the Valentinis are, Alessandro said. He looked at Marco with a directness that Elena admired. My sister is the best person I know. If you're offering her this to take advantage of her somehow, I'll find a way to make you regret it, hospital bed or not. Marco's smile widened. I like you. But no, I'm not taking advantage. I'm offering her an opportunity to use skills that have been buried under financial desperation. What she does with that opportunity is her choice. Alessandro studied Marco for a long moment, then turned to Elena. What do you want to do? Elena looked at her brother, really looked at him, at the walker that represented months of agonizing therapy, at the hospital bed that had been his prison, at the determination in his eyes that reminded her why she'd been killing herself with 3 jobs and 4 hours of sleep. I want to say yes, she whispered. But I'm scared. Of what? Of failing. Of not being good enough. Of... She stopped, unable to voice the deepest fear. That she'd take this chance and discover she really was just a cleaning woman playing at being something more. Alessandro reached out and took her hand. Elena, you raised me after Mom and Dad died. You put me through college working 2 jobs. You've been handling my medical care, the insurance nightmares, the therapy schedules, the medications, all while working yourself to death. If you can manage all of that, You can manage his logistics. Listen to your brother, Marco said quietly. He's smart. Elena looked between the two men in her life, her brother, who believed in her unconditionally, and Marco Valentini, who'd seen something in her that she'd stopped seeing in herself years ago. Okay, she said. I'll do it. Alessandro squeezed her hand. Good. Now get him to pay those medical bills before he changes his mind. Marco laughed, pulling out his phone. Give me the account numbers. I'll wire the funds today. As Elena rattled off the information from memory, she'd stared at those bills so many times she had them memorized. She felt something shift inside her chest. The weight she'd been carrying for 8 months, the crushing pressure of impossible debt, began to lift. Done, Marco said, showing her the transfer confirmation. $342,617.38. Paid in full. Elena stared at the screen, at the number that had haunted her nightmares, now reduced to 0 with a few taps of Marco's finger. She started crying. She didn't mean to, didn't want to show weakness in front of Marco. But the tears came anyway, hot and overwhelming, 8 months of terror and exhaustion pouring out all at once. Alessandro wrapped his arms around her as best he could from his chair. It's okay, sis. It's over. You can breathe now. Elena felt Marco's hand on her shoulder, warm and grounding. She looked up at him through her tears. Thank you, she managed. Thank you so much. You'll earn it, Marco said simply. Now go home. Get some real sleep. I'll send a car for you tomorrow at 9 a.m. We start your training then. Elena nodded, wiping her eyes. She stood, suddenly aware of how she must look. Exhausted, crying, still wearing her cleaning company uniform. But Marco was looking at her like she was something valuable, something worth investing in. Tomorrow, she agreed. As they left the hospital, Elena felt lighter than she had in months. The impossible weight was gone. She had a future beyond survival. She had a chance. She also had Marco Valentini watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with possibility. The training started simply enough. Marco had set up a workspace for Elena in a small office adjacent to his, with a view of Lake Michigan and furniture that was probably worth more than everything she owned. He'd provided her with a laptop, access to all company systems, and a thick folder of documentation on Valentini Enterprises' operations. Start by learning the legitimate businesses, he said, perching on the edge of her new desk. Shipping routes, real estate holdings, restaurant locations. Get the geography in your head first, then we'll move to the irregularities. Elena dove into the work with the intensity of someone who'd been starving and was suddenly given a feast. She read contracts. She studied shipping manifests. She created spreadsheets to track patterns in inventory movement. She color-coded everything. Marco's shipping routes in blue, real estate in green, restaurants in red, until her office walls were covered in maps and charts that made sense to her in a way they couldn't to anyone else. Marco watched. He didn't hover, didn't micromanage, but Elena was aware of his presence. He'd appear in her doorway with coffee, always prepared exactly the way she liked it, though she'd never told him. He'd ask questions that pushed her thinking. He'd listen when she explained her theories about inventory movement patterns. By the end of the first week, Elena had identified 3 major discrepancies in the shipping operations. Here, she said, pointing to a cluster of shipments on her map. These containers are all flagged as going to different warehouses, but they're all routed through the same distribution point first. That's inefficient unless there's a reason to centralize them. Marco leaned over her shoulder, studying the map. What kind of reason? Someone wants to physically access all of them before they reach their final destinations. To remove something, or add something. Elena pulled up the shipping manifests on her laptop. And look at the timing. They all arrive at this distribution point on Friday afternoons, right before the weekend, when staffing is minimal. Marco's expression hardened. Who manages that distribution point? According to your org chart, a man named Anthony Moretti. He's been with the company for 12 years, promoted to distribution manager 3 years ago. Moretti. Marco's voice was cold. He was Victor's nephew. Victor recommended him for the promotion. Elena heard the implication. The retiring operations manager had placed his own family member in a strategic position. A position that would give him access to shipments. A position where he could skim product for years without detection. I need to verify this before I act, Marco said. Can you set up surveillance on that distribution point? Monitor what happens to the shipments when they arrive? Elena thought fast. I can do better. I can cross-reference the inventory that arrives at the distribution point with the inventory that reaches the final warehouses. If there's shrinkage, we'll see it in the numbers. Do it. Marco straightened, and Elena could see the predator emerging. This was the man who ran a criminal empire alongside his legitimate businesses. This was the man who'd threatened the people who killed his mother. And Elena? Don't mention this to anyone. If Moretti suspects we're investigating, he'll destroy evidence. Understood. Marco paused at her door. You're good at this. Better than I expected. What did you expect? I don't know, but you're exceeding it. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his harsh features. Welcome to Valentini Enterprises, Elena, the real version. After he left, Elena sat back in her chair and stared at the maps covering her walls. She'd been working for Marco for exactly 7 days, and already she'd potentially uncovered a theft operation that had probably been running for years. She should have been intimidated, should have been worried about getting involved in the darker aspects of Marco's world. Instead, she felt alive. For the first time since the accident that shattered Alessandro's life and buried her under impossible debt, Elena Russo felt like herself again. The woman who saw patterns, the woman who solved problems, the woman who was capable of more than just surviving, and Marco Valentini had given her that gift. The trouble started 2 weeks later. Elena was working late, something that had become her new normal, not because she had to, but because the work was fascinating. She was building a complete map of Valentini's operations, tracking every shipment, every property, every dollar moving through the company. The patterns were emerging beautifully, telling her stories about efficiency and waste, about honest managers and suspicious ones. She was so absorbed in cross-referencing warehouse inventory records that she didn't hear her office door open. You're still here. Elena jumped, her hand going to her chest. Marco stood in the doorway, his jacket off, tie loosened, looking as tired as she felt. I didn't hear you come in, she said, clearly. Marco moved into her office, studying the latest additions to her wall maps. What did you find? Another irregularity, this one in the restaurant supply chain. Elena stood, pointing to a cluster of red pins on her Chicago map. These 5 restaurants all order from the same food distributor, but their invoices show different pricing for identical products. The variance is small, 5 to 8%, but it's consistent. Someone's inflating invoices and pocketing the difference. That's my theory. If I'm right, it's costing you about $40,000 a year across just these 5 locations. Elena pulled up a spreadsheet. I can verify it by spot-checking actual deliveries against invoiced amounts, but I'd need access to the restaurants. Marco was quiet, studying her work with that intense focus she'd come to recognize. When he looked at her like that, she felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. You found 3 separate theft operations in 2 weeks, Marco said quietly. Do you understand what that means? That your previous operations manager was either incompetent or complicit, and that you're in danger. Elena blinked. What? Marco turned to face her fully. Elena, the people you're exposing, they're not just employees. Some of them have connections to other families, other operations. When I move against them, and I will move against them, they'll know someone gave me the information. They'll figure out it was you. I'm just looking at numbers. You're threatening their income, their livelihood, maybe their freedom if the theft is serious enough to prosecute. Marco's voice was hard. And that makes you a target. Elena felt ice slide down her spine. She'd been so focused on the intellectual puzzle of finding the patterns that she hadn't considered the human consequences. The fact that somewhere in Chicago, people were stealing from Marco Valentini, and she was about to expose them. What do I do? She asked. You let me protect you. Marco moved closer, and Elena was suddenly very aware of how alone they were in the building. Starting tonight, you don't leave without security. I'm assigning you a driver and a bodyguard. Marco, that's excessive. It's necessary. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture that was becoming familiar. Intimate. Elena, you matter to me. Not just as an employee, as someone I care about keeping safe. Elena's breath caught. They'd been dancing around this for 2 weeks. The tension that crackled between them whenever they were in the same room, the way his eyes tracked her movements, the way she found excuses to stay late when she knew he'd still be working. Marco, she whispered. I know it's complicated, he said. I know you work for me, that there's a power imbalance. But I need you to understand that what I feel... He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. This isn't about business anymore. Elena's heart was pounding. She should step back, should maintain professional distance, should protect herself from the danger of caring about a man whose world included violence and darkness. Instead, she leaned into his touch. I know, she said softly. I feel it too. Marco's eyes darkened. For a moment, Elena thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her with an intensity that shocked her. Then the window exploded. Glass shattered inward as something heavy crashed through, hitting Elena's desk and sending papers flying. Marco reacted instantly, pulling Elena to the floor and covering her body with his as more glass rained down. Stay down, he ordered, his voice deadly calm despite the chaos. Elena's ears were ringing. She couldn't process what had happened. One moment she'd been on the verge of kissing Marco Valentini. The next, she was on the floor covered in glass with alarms blaring. Marco pulled out his phone, barking orders. Code red, 42nd floor. Secure the building. Nobody leaves. He helped Elena sit up, his hands running over her frantically. Are you hurt? Did any glass hit you? I don't think so. Marco, what? She saw it then. The object that had smashed through her window. It was a brick, wrapped in paper secured with a rubber band. Marco grabbed it, unfolding the paper carefully. Elena saw his jaw clench as he read whatever was written there. What does it say? She asked. Marco handed it to her. The message was printed in block letters. Stop looking or the next one goes through your head. Elena stared at the words, her hands shaking. This was real. The danger Marco had warned her about wasn't theoretical anymore. Someone knew what she was doing. Someone wanted her to stop. And they were willing to kill her to make it happen. That's it, Marco said, his voice arctic. You're moving into my building. Tonight. Where I can protect you properly. Marco. This isn't negotiable, Elena. He cupped her face in both hands, forcing her to look at him. Someone just threatened your life. You're not going back to that studio apartment with the broken lock. You're not taking the red line at 4 a.m. You're staying where I have security, cameras, and the ability to keep you safe. Elena knew she should argue. should resist this loss of independence, but the brick sitting on her desk and the shattered window behind her made the danger brutally clear. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Marco pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Elena could feel his heart hammering, could hear the barely controlled rage in his voice when he spoke. "I will find whoever did this," he promised against her hair, "and they will regret ever threatening you." Elena believed him, and for the first time since she'd taken this job, she understood the full reality of Marco Valentini's world. It wasn't just spreadsheets and shipping manifests. It was life and death. It was choosing sides. It was stepping across a line from which there was no return. And as Marco held her in the wreckage of her office, surrounded by a broken glass and the evidence of her work that someone wanted silenced, Elena Russo made her choice. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was staying right here, in the eye of the storm, with the dangerous man who'd seen her when she was invisible. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Marco Valentini's penthouse occupied the entire 45th floor of the Valentini Tower, a fortress of glass and steel suspended above the city like a crown. Elena had imagined it would be cold, sterile, a reflection of the controlled businessman she'd first met. But as the private elevator opened directly into his living space, she discovered something entirely different. It was a home. The floors were dark hardwood, covered with Persian rugs that looked antique and well-loved. The furniture was a mix of modern and traditional. Sleek Italian leather sofas paired with a heavy wooden dining table that could seat 12. But what caught Elena's attention was the walls. They were covered in photographs. Marco's family stared back at her from dozens of frames. His mother in the garden, the same image from his office but surrounded by others. Marco as a child with his mother and a man who must have been his father. Dark-haired, severe, powerful even in casual photographs. A teenage girl who had Marco's eyes and their mother's smile. "My sister Gabriella," Marco said, following Elena's gaze. "She lives in Lake Forest with her husband and 2 kids. She's the respectable one." Elena set down the overnight bag Marco's security team had packed from her apartment. She'd watched on camera, as 2 men efficiently gathered her essentials while a third stood guard. The violation of her space should have bothered her. Instead, she'd felt only relief that she'd never have to go back there. "This is beautiful," Elena said, touching one of the frames. "I expected something more. Minimal. Most people do." Marco moved to the kitchen, pulling out a bottle of wine. "They see the office, the suits, the corporate persona. They don't see this." "Why do you let me see it?" Marco poured 2 glasses of red wine, walking over to hand her one. "Because you're not most people. Because you saw my mother in that photograph and cared. Because—" He stopped, the admission catching in his throat. "Because what?" Elena prompted softly. "Because I want you to see me," Marco said simply. "The real me. Not the Valentini heir or the businessman or the man people are afraid to cross. Just Marco." Elena took a sip of wine to steady herself. The day had been catastrophic. The brick, the threat, the shattered window. But here, in Marco's private space surrounded by evidence of the family he loved, she felt oddly safe. "Where will I sleep?" she asked, changing the subject before the intensity between them became too much. "Guest room is down that hall. Second door on the right." Marco gestured with his wine glass. "Ensuite bathroom, walk-in closet. I had my housekeeper stock it with clothes in your size." Elena raised an eyebrow. "You know my size?" "I pay attention." Marco's lips quirked. "That dress you wore to Alessandro's therapy appointment last week was a size 4. Your shoes are 7.5. You prefer silver jewelry over gold. You drink your coffee with cream, no sugar. And you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating on a problem." Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. He'd been watching her as carefully as she'd been trying not to watch him. That's a little stalkerish, Mr. Valentini. I prefer thorough. Marco moved closer and Elena's pulse jumped. I told you weeks ago I'd been watching you. I meant it. Every morning for 3 months, I watched you move through my office like you belonged there. Like you were creating something beautiful out of chaos. And I knew I wanted you in my world. Your world is dangerous, Elena whispered. Someone threw a brick through my window tonight. And they'll pay for it. Marco's voice went cold. My security team is already reviewing footage from every camera within 3 blocks of the building. We'll find who did it. We'll find who ordered it. And we'll make sure they understand that touching you is the last mistake they'll ever make. Elena should have been frightened by the lethal certainty in his voice. Instead, she felt something dark and satisfied unfurl in her chest. After 8 months of being helpless while Alessandro suffered, after years of being invisible while she cleaned up other people's messes, there was power in being protected by someone who could actually do something about threats. What happens tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow, I start dismantling the theft operations you found. Moretti at the distribution center, the invoice padding at the restaurants. All of it. Marco set down his wine glass. It's going to get worse before it gets better, Elena. When people realize they're being exposed, they'll either run or fight. I need you to be prepared for that. I'm prepared. Are you? Marco reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate, so at odds with the violence they were discussing. Because once I start, there's no going back. You'll be known as the person who found the discrepancies. The person who cost them their livelihood. Some of these people have families, Elena. Kids they were feeding with stolen money. They chose to steal. Elena said firmly, they chose to betray you. That's not on me. Marco studied her face, something like approval flickering in his dark eyes. You're stronger than you think you are. I've had to be. They stood there in the quiet of his penthouse, the city glittering below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena was acutely aware of how close Marco was standing, how easy it would be to close the distance between them, how much she wanted to feel his arms around her again, like she had after the brick shattered her window. I should let you sleep, Marco said, but he didn't move away. It's been a long day. Marco, Elena said, making a decision. I don't want to sleep alone tonight. Not after... She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the fear that was lurking beneath her brave words. Marco's expression softened. Come here. He led her to the massive sectional sofa that faced the windows. He sat down and pulled Elena into his arms, settling her against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, grounding her. Tell me about your family, Elena said into the quiet. Your real family, not the business. Marco was silent for a moment, his hand stroking her hair absently. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. My mother was the best person I've ever known. She came from nothing. Immigrant family. Father was a tailor in Little Italy. She met my father when she was 19, working as a secretary in his first legitimate business. He was already building the empire, already walking the line between legal and illegal. She knew what he was. She loved him anyway. What was she like? Fierce, protective. She ran the household like a general, made sure Gabriella and I never wanted for anything, but she also made sure we understood that privilege came with responsibility. Marco's chest rumbled with a quiet laugh. She used to make me work in the garden with her as punishment when I got in fights at school. Said violence was for people who couldn't think their way through problems, and I was smarter than that. She sounds wonderful. She was, and when she died, Marco's voice cracked slightly. When I lost her, I lost the only person who saw past the Valentini name, the only person who loved me for me, not for what I could do for them. Elena lifted her head to look at him. I see you, Marco. Not the name. Not the power. You. Marco's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone in that gesture that was becoming his signature. I know you do. That's why you terrify me. I terrify you? Completely. Marco's eyes were intense, vulnerable in a way she suspected few people ever saw. Because I've spent 5 years building walls to keep people out, to keep myself focused on business and revenge and making sure my mother's death wasn't for nothing. And then you walked into my life organizing my desk and caring about a photograph, and all those walls started crumbling. Elena's heart was pounding. Marco. I'm falling in love with you, he said, the words raw and honest. I've been falling since I first watched you straighten my papers at 5 in the morning, and it scares the hell out of me because everyone I've loved has either been taken from me or tried to use my love as a weapon. Elena reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble beneath her palm. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not using you. I'm here because I want to be here, because you saw me when I was invisible, because you gave me a reason to be more than just surviving. Elena. Her name was a prayer on his lips. This time, when Marco leaned down to kiss her, Elena met him halfway. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like they were both afraid the other might pull away. But then Marco's hand threaded through her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Elena felt fire race through her veins. She'd been kissed before, by her college boyfriend who'd left when her parents died, and she'd become responsible for a teenage brother. By a few forgettable dates during the years before Alessandro's accident. But she'd never been kissed like this. Like she was precious and powerful, and the only thing that mattered in the world. Marco pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers, both of them breathing hard. We should stop, he said, though his hand was still in her hair and his voice suggested stopping was the last thing he wanted. Why? Because you just had a traumatic experience. Because you work for me. Because you're living in my home under my protection, and I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated or... Elena kissed him again, cutting off his noble objections. When she pulled back, she looked him straight in the eyes. I'm not traumatized. I'm not pressured. And I'm definitely not obligated. She smiled. I'm a grown woman making a choice. I'm choosing you, Marco Valentini. All of you. The dangerous parts and the gentle parts and everything in between. Marco's expression shifted, the careful control slipping to reveal raw desire. If we do this, there's no going back. You'll be mine, Elena, completely. I know. Elena stood up, offering her hand. Show me your bedroom. Marco stood, taking her hand, his grip warm and sure. Last chance to change your mind. I'm not changing my mind. He led her down the hallway, past the guest room he'd prepared for her, to the master suite at the end. The room was massive, dominated by a king-sized bed and another wall of windows overlooking the city. But Elena barely noticed the decor because Marco was kissing her again, his hands gentle but purposeful as they traced the curves of her body. Tell me if you want to stop, Marco murmured against her neck. Anytime. I mean it. I don't want to stop, Elena breathed. They came together with the intensity of weeks of denial, the careful professional distance they'd maintained finally shattering. Marco was gentle and fierce in equal measure, worshipping Elena's body like she was something sacred, while also claiming her with a possessiveness that made her feel cherished rather than owned. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Marco's bed, Elena's head on his chest, his arm wrapped around her protectively. I meant what I said, Marco said into the darkness. About falling in love with you. Elena smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest. I know. I'm falling too. Even knowing what I am? What my world involves? Especially knowing that. Elena lifted her head to look at him. Because I see all of you, Marco. And I'm not afraid. Marco pulled her closer, and Elena felt the last of her walls crumble. For 8 months, she'd been surviving, running on fumes and desperation and the crushing weight of impossible responsibility. But here, in Marco Valentini's arms, surrounded by his protection and the proof that she was valued for more than her ability to disappear, Elena Russo finally felt like she could breathe. Tomorrow would bring confrontations and consequences. Tomorrow, Marco would move against the people who'd betrayed him, and Elena would be revealed as the analyst who'd exposed them. Tomorrow, the danger would escalate. But tonight, she was safe. She was seen. She was loved. And that was worth any risk. The war started at dawn. Elena woke to the sound of Marco's voice, low and deadly, speaking rapid Italian into his phone. She sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, watching as he paced by the window dressed in dark suit pants and a white dress shirt he was buttoning with one hand while he talked. When he ended the call, he turned to find her awake. "I'm sorry," Marco said. "I was trying not to wake you." "What's happening?" Marco's expression was grim. "Anthony Moretti didn't show up for work this morning. His apartment is empty. His wife and kids are gone. He ran." Elena felt her stomach drop. He knows. Someone tipped him off. Marco sat on the edge of the bed taking Elena's hand. "Which means someone inside my organization knows we were investigating. Someone with enough access to see what you were working on." "Could it have been the brick? Maybe whoever threw it told Moretti to run." "Possible. But I don't think so. The brick was meant to scare you off. Running suggests Moretti has confirmation we found evidence." Marco's jaw tightened. "Someone close to me is feeding information to the people stealing from me." Elena squeezed his hand. "What are you going to do?" "I'm calling a meeting. Everyone with access to the operations reports. My accountants, my logistics team, my senior managers. I'm going to smoke out whoever betrayed me." Marco looked at her. "And I need you there. I need you to present your findings." Fear spiked through Elena. "Marco, if I present, everyone will know I'm the one who found the discrepancies." "I know, and I'm asking you to do it anyway, because I trust you more than anyone in that room." Marco cupped her face. "But I won't force you. If you want to stay out of it, give me your research and I'll present it myself." Elena thought about the brick, the threat, the very real danger of making herself a target. But she also thought about the past 3 weeks, discovering her talent for patterns, feeling her mind engage in a way it hadn't since before her parents died, being valued for her intelligence instead of her ability to be invisible. She thought about Marco watching her for 3 months, seeing something in her that she'd stopped seeing in herself. About him paying Alessandro's medical bills without hesitation. About the way he'd protected her body with his own when the window shattered. "I'll do it," Elena said. "I'll present my findings." Marco's expression shifted, pride mixing with worry. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. If there's a traitor in your organization, we need to find them, and my research is the way to do that." "Then we do this together." Marco leaned forward and kissed her, soft and quick. "Get dressed. The meeting is at 9. The Valentini Enterprises conference room on the 41st floor was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River. Leather chairs surrounded a table that could seat 20, and the entire space radiated power and money. Elena stood at the head of the table with her laptop, facing 15 men and 3 women who represented the senior leadership of Marco's organization. They looked at her with varying degrees of curiosity, confusion, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. Marco sat at the far end of the table, his expression unreadable. He'd introduced Elena as his new operations analyst and made it clear that her findings were to be taken seriously. But Elena could feel the skepticism radiating from the room. She was young, female, an outsider who'd been cleaning offices 3 weeks ago. Why should they listen to her? "Thank you all for coming," Elena began, her voice steady despite the nerves coiling in her stomach. "I know some of you are wondering who I am and why Mr. Valentini has asked me to speak to you today. The short answer is that I've spent the past 3 weeks analyzing our operations, and I've found significant irregularities that suggest organized theft." A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair leaned back in his chair. "With all due respect, Miss Russo, we have professional accountants and auditors. If there was theft, they would have found it." "Your accountants are looking at the numbers," Elena said calmly. "I was looking at the patterns. There's a difference." She clicked to her first slide, a map of Chicago with colored pins marking distribution centers, warehouses, and restaurants. "Let's start with the distribution center managed by Anthony Moretti," Elena said. "Over the past 18 months, these specific shipments," she highlighted a cluster in blue, "were all routed through Moretti's facility even though it was geographically inefficient. They all arrived on Friday afternoons when staffing was minimal, and when I cross-referenced the manifests with the actual inventory received at final destinations, there was an average shrinkage of 7.3%. She let that sink in, watching faces around the table shift from skeptical to interested. "Over 18 months, that's approximately $1.2 million in stolen product," Elena continued. "Product that was sold on secondary markets, with proceeds likely split between Moretti and whoever was providing him cover inside this organization." A woman with sharp eyes and severe gray hair leaned forward. "You're saying someone at this table was helping Moretti?" "I'm saying someone with access to operational oversight would have seen the same patterns I saw, if they were looking. The fact that they didn't report it suggests either incompetence or complicity." Elena held the woman's gaze. "And given that your previous operations manager, Victor Castellano, was Moretti's uncle, I'm leaning toward complicity." The room erupted. People talking over each other, denials and accusations flying. Marco didn't move, didn't speak, just watched Elena command the room with a small smile playing at his lips. Elena clicked to the next slide. "Let me show you the restaurant invoice scheme next." For the next 45 minutes, Elena walked them through 3 separate theft operations: the distribution center shrinkage, the inflated restaurant invoices, and a third scheme she'd discovered just last night: falsified maintenance contracts for Valentini properties where the work was never actually performed, but the invoices were paid in full. Collectively, Elena concluded, these operations have cost Valentini Enterprises approximately $2.8 million over the past 2 years, and they all have one thing in common. She clicked to her final slide. It showed the organizational structure of the company, with red lines connecting the various theft operations to a single name: Thomas Brennan, Chief Financial Officer. The silence in the room was deafening. Brennan was a man in his late 40s, handsome in a polished way, wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000. He'd been sitting quietly through Elena's presentation, his expression neutral. Now all eyes were on him. "This is absurd," Brennan said smoothly. "I've been with this company for 15 years. I've made Marco, Mr. Valentini, millions in profitable deals. And you're going to take the word of some cleaning woman who's been here 3 weeks?" Elena felt the dismissal like a slap. But Marco's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Watch your tone, Thomas." Brennan's eyes flicked to Marco, and Elena saw real fear there for the first time. "Marco, you can't seriously believe." "I believe the evidence." Marco stood, walking slowly around the table toward Brennan. "Elena's analysis is thorough, detailed, and backed by documentation you can't explain away. What I want to know is why." Why would my CFO, a man I trusted, steal from me? I didn't. Don't lie to me. Marco's voice was deadly quiet. Victor Castellano was your college roommate. When he retired, you helped his nephew get the distribution manager position. You approved the contracts with the falsified maintenance companies. You signed off on the restaurant invoices. It's all there in the paper trail. Brennan's polished facade cracked. Elena watched sweat bead on his forehead, watched his hands clench on the armrests of his chair. You don't understand, Brennan said. I was in debt. Gambling debt. The people I owed, they were going to kill me if I didn't pay. I had no choice. You had a choice, Marco said. You could have come to me. I would have helped you. Instead, you stole from me. You recruited others to steal from me. You betrayed 15 years of loyalty for what? A few $1,000,000? It was 3 million, Brennan said bitterly. And you would never have missed it. You're worth 10 times that. But me? I needed it to stay alive. Marco grabbed Brennan by the front of his expensive shirt, hauling him out of his chair with shocking violence. The other people in the room scrambled back, giving them space. You're right, Marco said, his voice cold as death. I wouldn't have missed the money, but I do miss the trust. I do miss the loyalty. And I will miss the example I'm about to make of you. Elena watched, her heart pounding as Marco's security team entered the room. 2 large men in dark suits who moved with military precision. Take him to the sub-basement, Marco ordered. I'll deal with him after this meeting. As Brennan was dragged from the room, still protesting his innocence despite having just confessed, Marco turned to face the remaining senior staff. Let this be a lesson, Marco said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. I reward loyalty generously, but I punish betrayal absolutely. Anyone else who's been skimming, anyone else who thinks they can steal from me and escape consequences, you have 24 hours to come to me voluntarily. After that, I start hunting. And I won't be as merciful as I was with Brennan. He looked at Elena, something warm breaking through the ice. Miss Russo will be continuing her analysis of all company operations. You will cooperate with her completely. She speaks with my full authority. Understood? A chorus of, "Yes, Mr. Valentini," echoed through the room. Good. Meeting adjourned. The senior staff filed out quickly, most of them avoiding Elena's eyes. A few, including the sharp-eyed woman with gray hair, nodded respectfully as they passed. When the room was empty except for Marco and Elena, he crossed to her. You were magnificent, he said. Elena was shaking, the adrenaline finally catching up with her. I just ended a man's life. Or his career. Or, Marco, what are you going to do to Brennan? What he deserves. Marco's expression was hard. He stole from me. He betrayed me. In my world, that has consequences. You're going to kill him. No. Marco took her hands. I'm going to make him wish I had. I'm going to take everything he has. His money, his reputation, his connections. I'm going to make sure the people he owes his gambling debts to know exactly where to find him. And then I'm going to make sure he lives long enough to regret every choice that brought him to this moment. Elena should have been horrified, should have been sickened by the casual way Marco discussed destroying another human being, but all she felt was a grim satisfaction. Brennan had stolen from Marco, had betrayed his trust, had recruited others into his scheme, creating a network of corruption that had cost millions. And he'd called her some cleaning woman, like her insights were worthless because of where she'd come from. Good, Elena said. Marco's eyebrows rose. Good? He deserves it. They all deserve it. They took advantage of you, Marco. They thought they could steal from you because you wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. Elena squeezed his hands. I'm glad you're making them pay. Marco studied her face, something like wonder in his expression. You continue to surprise me, Elena Russo. Good, I'd hate to be predictable. He kissed her then, fierce and possessive, right there in the conference room with its wall of windows overlooking the city. Elena kissed him back, feeling powerful and seen, and like she'd finally found the place she was supposed to be. When they broke apart, Marco rested his forehead against hers. There's going to be fallout from this, he warned. Brennan has friends, associates, people who benefited from his schemes. They'll come after you. Then you'll protect me. With my life. Marco's voice was absolute. But Elena, I need you to understand what that means. From this moment forward, you're not just my analyst or my lover. You're mine. Part of my world. Part of my family. That comes with privileges, but it also comes with danger. I understand. Do you? Marco pulled back to look at her. Because there's no going back from this. Once you're part of the Valentini family, you're in it for life. Enemies will target you to get to me. Allies will court you to gain favor. Your life will never be simple or safe again. Elena thought about her studio apartment with the broken lock. About cleaning offices at dawn to pay bills that never stopped coming. About being invisible and exhausted and slowly eroding under the weight of impossible responsibility. Then she thought about the past 3 weeks. About using her mind instead of just her hands. About being valued and protected and loved by a man who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. I choose this, Elena said firmly. I choose you. All of it. Marco's smile was slow and devastating. Then let's go home. I have a traitor to dismantle and a woman to celebrate. As they left the conference room together, Elena caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished windows. She looked different, stronger, more alive than she'd been in years. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a ghost moving through Marco Valentini's office at dawn. Now she was the woman who'd brought his enemies to their knees, and she was just getting started. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Marco moved against the theft network with surgical precision. Moretti's wife, it turned out, had taken their kids to a motel in Indiana. Marco's security team found them within 6 hours. The message delivered to Moretti, currently hiding in a cousin's basement in Milwaukee, was simple. Turn yourself in, or your family suffers for your choices. Moretti was in FBI custody by noon the next day, making a deal to testify against Brennan in exchange for a reduced sentence. The restaurant managers who'd been inflating invoices were fired. The maintenance company owners who'd been billing for ghost work were sued into bankruptcy. And Brennan, Thomas Brennan, who'd called Elena some cleaning woman, was systematically destroyed. Elena watched it happen from her new office, the one adjacent to Marco's, with windows overlooking Lake Michigan. She watched as Marco seized Brennan's assets, foreclosed on his house, destroyed his professional reputation with strategic leaks to industry contacts. She watched as the gambling syndicate Brennan owed received an anonymous tip about exactly where to find him. She should have felt guilty, should have felt something like mercy, but every time doubt crept in, she remembered the brick through her window, the threat, the casual dismissal of her intelligence because she'd once cleaned floors. Justice, Elena decided, wasn't always pretty, but it was necessary. On the 4th day, Marco's sister came to visit. Elena was reviewing shipping manifests when Gabriella Santoro swept into her office like a force of nature. She was beautiful in the way Italian women often were: dark hair, expressive eyes, effortless elegance. She was also visibly pregnant, probably 6 months along, and radiating an energy that made Elena immediately nervous. "So you're the famous Elena," Gabriella said, settling into the chair across from Elena's desk without waiting for an invitation. "The woman who's got my brother acting like a human being again." Elena set down her pen. "I'm sorry. I don't think we've been properly introduced. Gabriella Santoro, Marco's baby sister, though I'm 32, so baby is a stretch." Gabriella smiled, warm and genuine. I'm here to meet the woman who exposed Thomas Brennan and apparently stole my brother's heart in the process. Elena felt heat creep into her cheeks. I didn't steal anything. I just... Relax. I'm teasing. Gabriella leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. But I am here to warn you about what it means to be with someone like Marco. He's already warned me about the danger, the complications. I'm not talking about that. Gabriella waved a hand dismissively. Marco can handle the physical dangers. What he can't handle is losing someone else he loves. After Mama died, he shut down completely. Threw himself into business and revenge and making sure the Valentini name meant something. He stopped being my brother and became this untouchable thing. Elena listened, seeing Marco through his sister's eyes for the first time. But you, Gabriella continued, you've made him human again. He talks about you like you hung the moon. He's protective in a way I haven't seen since Mama was alive. And that scares me, Elena. Because if something happens to you, if you leave him, or get hurt, or decide this life isn't for you... She stopped, emotion thickening her voice. I don't know if he'll survive it. I'm not leaving, Elena said quietly. I know what I signed up for. Do you? Gabriella's eyes were sharp. Because it's not just the violence and the danger. It's the holidays where half the family doesn't show up because they're in prison or hiding from the FBI. It's the knowledge that the money paying for your beautiful life comes from sources you can't ask too many questions about. It's raising kids who'll inherit this legacy whether they want it or not. She placed a hand on her pregnant belly. My husband is legitimate, surgeon, completely clean. But my kids will still be Valentini's. They'll still have that name and everything it carries. You need to think about that, Elena. Really think about it. Elena was quiet for a moment, processing Gabriella's words. Then she looked up and met her eyes directly. I spent 8 months watching my brother relearn how to walk while I worked 3 jobs to pay medical bills I'd never escape. I spent years being invisible, being the person nobody saw or valued. And then your brother saw me. He saw something in me I'd stopped seeing in myself. Elena's voice was steady, certain. So yes, I understand what I'm signing up for. The danger, the complications, the moral gray areas. And I choose it anyway. Because a life with Marco, even with all of that, is better than a life without him. Gabriella studied her for a long moment, then smiled. Good. That's the right answer. She stood, smoothing her maternity dress. Welcome to the family, Elena. Officially. Mama would have liked you. How do you know? Because she always said Marco needed someone who could stand up to him. Someone who saw past the power to the man underneath. Gabriella moved toward the door, then paused. There's a memorial mass for Mama next week. 5th anniversary of her death. I expect to see you there. Of course. After Gabriella left, Elena sat at her desk feeling the weight of what she'd just committed to. She wasn't just dating Marco Valentini. She wasn't just working for him. She was becoming part of his family. Part of his world. Part of his legacy. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. The memorial mass was held at Old St. Mary's in the Loop, a Catholic church that had stood for over a century. Elena wore a simple black dress Marco had bought for her, her hair pulled back in a respectful bun. She sat beside Marco in the front pew, his hand gripping hers tightly throughout the service. The church was packed. Elena recognized some faces from the office, senior staff, business associates. But there were also people who looked like they'd come from different walks of life. Tailors, restaurant workers, people whose faces were weathered by hard lives. My mother helped people, Marco whispered, seeing Elena's curious look. Immigrants, mostly. people who needed work or housing or just a kind word. Half the people here owe their lives in America to Lucia Valentini. The priest spoke about mercy and grace and the legacy of good works. Gabriella gave a tearful eulogy about a mother who'd been fierce and loving and who'd taught her children that power without compassion was empty. Then Marco stood. Elena hadn't known he was planning to speak. She watched him walk to the pulpit, watched him grip the edges of the wood like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "My mother believed in second chances," Marco said, his voice carrying through the silent church. "She believed that your past didn't have to define your future, that you could make different choices, be different than what the world expected." He looked directly at Elena. She would have liked Elena Russo. She would have seen in her what I see: strength, intelligence, compassion. The kind of qualities that make a person worth knowing, worth protecting, worth loving. Elena felt tears slide down her cheeks. Around her, she could hear soft crying from other attendees. "Mama, if you're listening," Marco's voice cracked. "I found someone. Someone who sees me the way you did. Someone who makes me want to be the man you raised me to be, not just the man circumstances demanded. I hope that makes you proud." He stepped down from the pulpit and returned to his seat. Elena took his hand, squeezing hard, offering what comfort she could. After the service, people approached to offer condolences. Elena met dozens of Valentini associates, family friends, and people whose lives had been touched by Lucia's generosity. Each one looked at Elena with curiosity, assessing her, trying to determine if she was worthy of Marco's attention. An elderly woman with kind eyes gripped Elena's hand firmly. "You have his mother's photograph in his office, yes? You're the one who cleans it properly." "I used to clean his office," Elena said. "Now I work as his operations analyst." "Good. He needs someone smart, someone who sees him clearly." The woman patted Elena's cheek. "Lucia told me once that Marco would either destroy himself or save himself, depending on who he let into his heart. I think you might be his salvation." The words stayed with Elena through the reception at Gabriella's house, through the quiet dinner with Marco's extended family, through the drive back to the penthouse as night fell over Chicago. "Are you okay?" Elena asked, as they rode the elevator up. "I am now." Marco pulled her close. "Thank you for being there today." "Where else would I be?" They entered the penthouse, and Elena was starting toward the bedroom when Marco caught her hand. "Wait, there's something I want to show you." He led her to his office, a room in the penthouse Elena had seen but never really examined. Marco went to a safe hidden behind a painting and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's breath caught. "It's not what you think," Marco said quickly. "Not yet anyway, but I want you to have this." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Not an engagement ring, but a signet ring. Gold, heavy, with the Valentini family crest etched into the surface. "This was my mother's," Marco said. "My father gave it to her when they got married. It symbolizes her place in the family, her protection under the Valentini name." He took the ring out and held Elena's hand. "I want you to wear it. I want everyone to know that you're under my protection, that you're family." "Marco, you don't have to decide about marriage yet. We've only known each other a month. But I need you to have this. I need you to be safe. And in my world, this ring makes you untouchable." Elena looked at the ring, at the weight of history and protection it represented. Then she looked at Marco, at the man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd given her brother his life back, who'd shown her that she was capable of so much more than she'd imagined. "Put it on," she said. Marco slid the ring onto her right hand. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. "There's something you should know," Marco said, still holding her hand. "Wearing this ring means you're part of the family, but it also means you're a target." My enemies will see it and know that hurting you hurts me. It makes you valuable, dangerous, someone worth watching. I understand. And you accept it anyway? I accept it because of what it means. That I belong somewhere. That someone claims me. That I'm not invisible anymore. Elena touched the ring, feeling the weight of it. I spent so long trying not to be seen. Now I want everyone to see me. To know I'm yours. Marco kissed her then, deep and possessive, claiming her mouth the way the ring claimed her identity. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. One day, he promised, I'm going to give you a different ring, one that means forever, one that makes you my wife in every way. I'll be waiting. They made love that night with an intensity born of commitment and promise. Elena felt the ring heavy on her finger, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone anymore, that she had a family, a protector, a future. Afterward, wrapped in Marco's arms with the city lights twinkling below them, Elena thought about the brick through her window. The threats, the danger that came with loving a man like Marco Valentini. And she regretted nothing. Because for the first time in 8 months, maybe in her entire life, Elena Russo felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The attack came 1 week later, on a Tuesday morning when Elena was alone in her office. Marco had left for a meeting with city officials about a development project, taking most of his security team with him. Elena had stayed behind to finish analyzing a new set of shipping contracts, lost in the familiar rhythm of finding patterns in data. She didn't hear the office door open. The first indication something was wrong was a hand clamping over her mouth from behind, cutting off her scream. Elena's training kicked in. Marco had insisted she take self-defense lessons, and she drove her elbow backward hard. Her attacker grunted but didn't let go. Another set of hands grabbed her arms, pulling them behind her back. Elena struggled, kicking and fighting, but there were 2 of them and only one of her. Stop fighting or this gets messy, a male voice growled in her ear. Elena stilled, her heart hammering. She tried to see their faces, but they wore ski masks. One was tall and thin, the other shorter and muscular. Good girl, the tall one said. He spun her around, slamming her against the desk. You know who sent us? Elena shook her head, trying to control her breathing. Don't panic. Marco would notice she wasn't answering her phone. He'd send people. Thomas Brennan says hello, the shorter man said. Says to tell you that destroying his life was a mistake. Understanding dawned. Brennan, currently on the run from both Marco and the gambling syndicate he owed, had sent these men for revenge. He wants you to deliver a message to Valentini, the tall one continued. Tell him that his protection means nothing. Tell him that everyone he loves will pay for what he did. The shorter man pulled out a knife. Elena's blood went cold. We're supposed to hurt you, he said, almost apologetically. Not kill you, just hurt you enough that Valentini understands he's not untouchable. Elena looked at the ring on her finger. The Valentini crest gleamed in the office lighting. She thought about Marco's promise that the ring made her untouchable, that it symbolized protection. But protection was only as good as the people enforcing it. And right now, she was alone. You don't have to do this, Elena said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Whatever Brennan is paying you, Marco Valentini will pay more to know who sent you. The tall one laughed. Nice try, but we're not interested in your boyfriend's money. We're interested in making a point. He nodded to his partner. The shorter man grabbed Elena's right hand, forcing it flat on the desk. The ring glinted mockingly. This will hurt, he said, raising the knife. Elena closed her eyes, bracing for pain. The office window exploded. Glass shattered inward as a figure crashed through, rolling and coming up with a gun in each hand. Elena recognized him immediately. Vincent Calabrese, Marco's consigliere, moving with the lethal grace of a trained killer. He fired twice. Both attackers dropped, the tall one clutching his leg, the shorter one his shoulder. Non-lethal shots, but incapacitating. More security flooded into the office through the door. Elena was pulled away from the desk, checked for injuries, wrapped in a blanket despite not being cold. Vincent stood over the two attackers, his gun still trained on them. "Who sent you?" he demanded. "Fuck you!" The tall one spat. Vincent shot him in the other leg. The man screamed. "I'll ask again. Who sent you?" "Brennan!" the man gasped. "Thomas Brennan. He's hiding in Detroit, paying us to send a message." Vincent pulled out his phone, dialing. "Boss, we have a situation. 2 men tried to grab Elena. They're neutralized. Brennan sent them." Elena could hear Marco's roar even through the phone, a string of Italian profanity that made Vincent wince. "He's on his way," Vincent said to Elena. "Are you hurt?" Elena shook her head. She was trembling but uninjured. The ring on her finger caught the light, and she realized the shorter attacker had been about to cut it off, or cut off her finger to remove it. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Marco arrived 10 minutes later, crashing through the office like a force of nature. He went straight to Elena, pulling her into his arms and checking her over with frantic hands. "Did they touch you? Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay. Vincent got here in time." Marco looked at his consigliere with something like worship. "Thank you." "Just doing my job, boss. Though I should mention, I got here because Gabriella called. Said she had a bad feeling and asked me to check on Elena." Marco closed his eyes briefly. "Remind me to buy my sister something extravagant." He turned to the two attackers, who were being secured by security. The transformation in Marco's demeanor was terrifying, from worried lover to cold executioner in seconds. "Take them to the warehouse," Marco ordered. "I want everything they know about Brennan. Location, contacts, everything, and I don't care what methods you use to get it." "Marco," Elena started. "No." He turned back to her, his eyes hard. "These men came into my building. They put their hands on you. They were going to hurt you to send me a message. I will find Brennan, and I will make him regret ever speaking your name." Elena saw the violence in him then, the darkness that came with being Marco Valentini. This wasn't the man who held her tenderly at night, or spoke to his mother's photograph. This was the Mafia boss who'd built an empire on fear and respect, and she wasn't afraid of him. "Take me with you," Elena said. Marco blinked. "What?" "When you go after Brennan, I want to be there. I want to see it." "Elena, that's not—" "I'm wearing your mother's ring, Marco. I'm part of this family, part of this world. I don't want to be protected in the penthouse while you handle the ugly parts. I want to see it. All of it." Marco studied her face, searching for fear or hesitation. Finding none, something shifted in his expression. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He nodded slowly. "Then you'll see it. Everything. But Elena." His hand came up to cup her face. "Once you see this side of me, really see it, you can't unsee it. There's no going back." "I don't want to go back." Marco kissed her forehead. "Then let's go to war." They found Thomas Brennan in a run-down motel outside Detroit, courtesy of the information Vincent extracted from the two attackers. Marco brought a team of 6 plus Elena in 2 black SUVs that looked like they meant business. The raid was quick and brutal. Marco's men kicked in the motel room door at 2 a.m., dragging Brennan from his bed before he could even scream. They zip-tied his hands, threw a hood over his head, and had him in the back of an SUV within 90 seconds. Elena watched from the second vehicle, feeling the reality of Marco's world settle over her like a heavy coat. This wasn't business analysis. This was kidnapping. This was the beginning of something that would likely end with Brennan dead, or wishing he was. They drove to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Detroit, the kind of place where screams wouldn't carry and blood could be hosed away without leaving evidence. Marco's men dragged Brennan inside and secured him to a chair in the center of the empty space. Marco removed the hood himself. Brennan's eyes widened when he saw Marco. Then they went to Elena, standing slightly behind Marco, and something like shame flickered across his face. "Marco, please," Brennan started. "You sent men to hurt her," Marco said quietly. "To send me a message." "What was the message, Thomas?" "I was desperate. The people I owe, they're killing me, Marco. I had to do something." "So you chose to target an innocent woman?" Marco's voice was colder than Elena had ever heard it. "You chose to send men with knives to cut her? To hurt her because you couldn't face me directly? I didn't tell them to kill her. You told them to hurt her. You told them to make her bleed." Marco moved closer, and Elena saw Brennan flinch. "Do you know what that ring on her finger means, Thomas? Do you understand what it symbolizes?" "Marco, please, I'll do anything." "It means she's family. It means touching her is the same as touching my mother, my sister, my blood." Marco's hand shot out, gripping Brennan's throat. "And you know what I do to people who hurt my family, don't you?" Brennan was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. God, Marco, I'm so sorry." "Tell her." Marco released his throat and stepped back. "Look at Elena and tell her what you're sorry for." Brennan's eyes found Elena's. She stood tall, refusing to look away, refusing to show the fear that was coiling in her stomach. "I'm sorry," Brennan whispered. "I'm sorry for calling you a cleaning woman like it was an insult. I'm sorry for sending those men. I'm sorry for everything." Elena walked forward. Marco tensed, ready to pull her back, but she waved him off. She stopped in front of Brennan, looking down at him. "You thought I was nothing," Elena said quietly. "You thought because I cleaned offices, I wasn't worth respecting. That my intelligence didn't matter. That I was just some woman Marco was using. I was wrong. You were. Because I'm the one who found your schemes. I'm the one who exposed you. I'm the one who destroyed your career, your reputation, your life." Elena leaned closer. "And I'm the one who's going to watch Marco destroy what's left of you." She stepped back, returning to Marco's side. Marco looked at her with something like awe. Then he turned back to Brennan. "I'm not going to kill you, Thomas. That would be too quick. Too merciful." Marco pulled out his phone. "Instead, I'm going to call the people you owe money to. I'm going to tell them exactly where you are, and I'm going to let them collect their debt the way they see fit." "No!" Brennan screamed. "Marco, please, they'll torture me." "Yes, they will." Marco's voice was flat, emotionless. "Just like you planned to have Elena tortured. Just like you thought you could betray me without consequences." He made the call, spoke in clipped sentences to whoever answered, gave the address of the warehouse. "They'll be here in 20 minutes, Marco said when he hung up. "I suggest you make peace with whatever God you believe in." He took Elena's hand and led her toward the door. Behind them, Brennan's screams echoed through the empty warehouse. Outside, in the cool night air, Elena finally let herself shake. Marco wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "That was the ugly side," he said quietly. "The part most people never see. The part you can't unsee now." "I know." "And you're still here." "I'm still here." Elena pulled back to look at him. "Marco, I'm not going to pretend that was easy to watch. I'm not going to say I don't have questions about the morality of leaving him to those people. But I also remember that he sent men to hurt me. to cut me with knives, to make me bleed just to send you a message. He chose his fate. Yes, he did. Elena touched the ring on her finger. Just like I chose mine. They drove back to Chicago in silence, leaving Brennan to face the consequences of his choices. Elena didn't ask what would happen to him. She didn't want to know the details. What she did know was that this was who Marco Valentini was. Protective and ruthless, loving and dangerous. A man who would move heaven and earth to keep her safe, but who would also destroy anyone who threatened her. And she loved him anyway. Back at the penthouse, as dawn broke over Chicago, Elena stood by the windows watching the city wake up. Marco came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No regrets?" he asked. "None." Elena turned in his arms. "I know who you are now. All of you. The gentle man who speaks to his mother's photograph, and the dangerous one who leaves his enemies to their fate. And I choose all of it." Marco kissed her, soft and reverent. "Then marry me." Elena's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me." Marco pulled a ring from his pocket, a different ring this time, platinum with a single perfect diamond. "I was going to wait, to do this properly. But Elena, I almost lost you today. And I realized I don't want to waste another second pretending we're not building a life together. So marry me. Be my wife. Be my partner in everything." Elena looked at the ring, at the man offering it, at the future spreading out before them. Dangerous and complicated and perfect. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Marco slid the ring onto her left hand, beside his mother's signet ring. The two pieces of jewelry gleamed together, symbols of past and future, legacy and promise. As the sun rose over Chicago, Elena Russo, soon to be Elena Valentini, stood in the arms of the man who'd seen her when she was invisible and realized she'd found something she didn't even know she'd been looking for. She'd found home. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.